Okay. Well, we're going to start. Your Eminence, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to those who live down under, and good morning to Liz Chater in London, and good afternoon, Julieta in Yerevan. It's 1 o'clock, you said, in Yerevan. I appreciate if you can mute yourselves. Thank you. I would like to invite His Eminence, Archbishop Haigazun Nadiarian, our primate, to start this event by his opening prayer. Your Eminence, please unmute.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Anhor yevorto yevokun sirpo amen. Hayr vorherginses surp yegitsi anunko yegesse arkayutunko yegitsin gamko vorbe serginus yevhergri satsmer hanabazor durmez aysor yevtogmez bardismer vorbes yemek tongmerot bardabanats yemi danirz mez iportutun այլ փրկյազ մեզ իչարե զիկոյ արքայություն եւ զորություն եւ փառքավիդյան սամեն սկորդս ծերած մերոց ուղի գարայի մեզ դեր եւ սկորդս ծերած մերոց հաճողյա մեզ դեր amen.
Amen. Thank you, Your Eminence. Dear participants, for those who don't know me, my name is Nishan Basmajian. I am the Chancellor of the Diocese of the Armenian Church of Australia and New Zealand, and your MC tonight. Consecutively, I'll introduce our first and second speaker tonight, Liz Chater and Julieta Arslanian. But before that, allow me to welcome our guests from Chennai, India, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Sydney, Melbourne, Dubai, Kuwait, Auckland, United Nations. Liz Chater is a specialist in Armenian family history in India. She was born in the UK. She still lives there. Like many diasporas with Armenian connections, her interest in genealogy stems from a thirst to know more about her own roots. Liz has spent a great deal of time researching at the British Library in London, where the old colonial Indian records are kept. Over the last 20 years, she has made several research trips to India and has photographed some of the very early Armenian registers held at the Armenian Church in Kolkata or Calcutta. In particular, the early Armenian baptisms between 1793 and 1859. With the help of volunteer translators, it took around 2 years to complete the transcriptions into English from classical Julfan Armenian. Julfan Armenian, that's the dialect of Julfa, which we call in Armenian Jugai Parpar. Liz then donated the entire English translations to the organization called Families in British India Society. That's abbreviated, it's FIBIS. That was donated, for their database. And this is the first time any Armenian records in India have been translated into English. Liz has also donated transcriptions of Armenians in Yangon. Yangon is ex-Rangoon, Myanmar or Burma, and has regularly contributed and helped others in FIBIS with their Armenian family history queries. During her visit to India, she has photographed all the remaining Armenian graves in the cemeteries in Kolkata, Saidabad, Chinsura, Tangra, Toligunj. She also has a complete set of Armenian images for the cemeteries in Hyderabad, Agra, Madras, India, and Dhaka, Bangladesh, as well as many other smaller locations with micro pockets of Armenian burials and tombstones such as Ranchi. These amount to a couple of thousand images. They are not few images, there are many. Liz has created a website and uploaded the images of the tombstones and made them freely available to help other family history researchers. Liz Chater is currently the Heritage Coordinator for the Armenian Church, Dhaka, and has been pivotal in helping to recreate the lost stories and history of the Armenian presence in Bangladesh. She has created and coordinated the website and social media platforms and has written several articles and books for news agencies and outlets around the world, highlighting and promoting the Armenian presence in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Well, we are going to reveal a secret tonight. On top of all this, you heard, Liz Chater has attended the ordination of our very dear Father Avedi Sampartsumyan in Calcutta. Well, before welcoming Liz Chater, allow me to introduce another energetic young professional, Miss Julieta Arslanian. Julia Arslanian was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1991, at the heart of a proud Armenian family, and later she moved to Los Angeles, California with her family in year 1998. She attended AGBU Armenian School, Mari Manukyan, and then went on to graduate from the University of Southern California, majoring in philosophy, politics, law, and minoring in psychology. Shortly after graduating, she began working in the family business as a temporary job, but over time worked her way up to become Senior Vice President of Global Sales. This position required to travel the world, one of the key locations being Dhaka, Bangladesh, which led to her current involvement in the church. Julie is involved in several philanthropic projects deeply rooted in the development of Armenia, such as AGBU's Women Empowerment Program in Armenia, COAF, that is Children of Armenia Fund, and Where Armenia, which she founded last year in 1922, right, Julie? Through these projects, she has dedicated time, resources, and her expertise to help women and children in Armenia, as well as in Artsakh. She also is part of the Artsakh Social State Fund. As a member of the board of the Armenian Church in Bangladesh, her focus is the importance of education amongst the underprivileged youth in Dhaka. Before welcoming Julieta, few words about her dad, Armen Arslanian, warden of the Church of Holy Resurrection in Dhaka. It is due to his efforts that the church survives today. The Armenian nation should be grateful to you, Baron Armen. Is she with us, Julie? Not yet. During the lecture, you will hear more testimonies about Armen, this great Armenian. Well, a few details about how we are going to proceed. Liz will start with Bangladesh presentation, giving examples of historical footprint of Armenians in Bangladesh. Then Julieta will continue. When she finishes, Liz will talk about Sir Paul Catchik Chater, without whom Hong Kong wouldn't be what it has been in the 20th century. Well, that will follow with a Q&A session. You can ask questions at the end of both presentations, but in order not to forget them, please write them in the chat box or at the end, raise your hands either electronically or physically. I leave that to your convenience. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Liz Chater and Julieta Arslanian. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Nishan. That's a really lovely introduction. And thank you everyone for taking the time out of your days, wherever you are in the world, to sign in and listen to our little presentation here. I'd like to thank His Eminence Bishop Moderator and Father Avatis, who I just saw earlier. It was absolutely delightful to see him, and the Australian Diocese for inviting us to participate in this online lecture. It is an honour to be speaking with you all today. Our present church warden is Arslanian. He was born and raised in Argentina and moved to the United States in 1997. His career has taken him through many parts of the world, one of them being Bangladesh. Arman often states that he's not a historian, academic, or very religious person. He is just a proud Armenian who stumbled across something great, far greater than him. A little background on the Armenian church in Dhaka. A number of Armenians from Calcutta would trade between the two locations. By mid-18th century, there was a small community of Armenians in Dhaka, some of whom had come directly from Julfa, some who had settled there from other parts of India. They were mainly concentrated in an area located at the northwest bank of the Baragunja River, and over time, this part of Dhaka, to this day, became known as Armanitola. Several leading Armenians were landowners holding large swathes of land in the surrounding area. Armenians traded in salt, piece goods, muslins, cotton, spices. Some merchants engaged in business with the East India Company, some successfully, others not so much. It should be remembered that although there were Armenian men living in Dhaka, the presence of Armenian women was not so large. Inevitably, Armenians in Asia often had mixed marriages, some with European women and some with local native ladies. The families all lived and worked as part of the Armenian community, be it in Dhaka, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, or any other location in India where there was an Armenian presence. This is often how communities survived. In the middle of the 1850s, Dhaka was the centre of the flourishing hide and tanning business. At the forefront of this enterprise was a very young Makar David. He had migrated from Bushir around 1853 at the age of 19 and quickly established himself as a reputable dealer. He was one of the first merchants to send hides directly to Calcutta, the hide business being an extremely lucrative industry to be in. By the 1920s, the hide business employed well over 10,000 local native Dhaka men and was a key industry for their livelihoods. Makar was a forward thinker and moved to create another business while successfully running his hide and tanning enterprise. He saw the value in jute and in the 1870s created his own jute business. Seeing its potential for profits, he developed a factory and was probably a jump ahead of everyone else joining this particular bandwagon. He employed other Armenians from within the Dhaka community, some eventually branching out, forming their own companies. We are extremely fortunate that some of Makar's living descendants have been enthusiastic contributors to our heritage project, where we have tried to recreate some of our lost history. The family still have some letters and personal notes and have been extremely useful in our history research. If you visit our website, you will see an entire section dedicated to Dhaka memories, where diaspora contributions have been made to our project. The earliest surviving Armenian tombstone in Bangladesh is not situated in the courtyard of the Armenian church, but rather in the Tejagon cemetery of Our Lady of the Holy Rosary. Prior to the Armenian church in Dhaka being built in 1781, Armenians are recorded as worshipping at the Holy Rosary Church, located just a few miles away. Within the grounds of the original Holy Rosary Church was a small section for Armenian burials. This extremely early Armenian tombstone of Khoja Avitus Lazar dates back to June 1714. Today, the original Holy Rosary Church is set behind large modern frontage and contains the remains of well-preserved and cared for Armenian tombstones, but they are not in their original positions. We are enormously grateful to the Catholic Church at Tejagon for preserving these unique and historical stones and offer our grateful thanks to them for doing so. The earliest surviving will of an Armenian merchant in Dhaka dates to 1757, and it is of Khoja Abalad, son of Isaac. It was drawn up on the 7th of April that year, and he died the next day. It is from documents such as this that we slowly rebuild a picture of these forgotten merchants. For instance, we know that Khoja Abalad was buried at Tejagon, because in the document it contains a bequest to the padre of the church for his interment. Unfortunately, no stone survives for him today. We can also see that he remembered the Armenian bishop in Calcutta, but what is really exciting is that we can see there was an Armenian priest in Dhaka at the time called Padre Johannes. At 1757, this is the earliest tangible reference to an Armenian priest being present here in Dhaka. Furthermore, Khoja Abalad left a very small bequest for sacred ornaments to be purchased in Dhaka. I'm excited to be able to add this small but very important piece of information into our heritage project. The community was never large in numbers, and to give you an idea of its size, we know that in 1831, there were 42 Armenian houses in Dhaka, made up of 49 adult males, 37 adult females, 25 male children under 16, and 15 females under 16, making a total Armenian population in Dhaka in 1831 of 126 people. Regardless of these small numbers, Armenians, wherever they end up in the world, take their faith with them. In 1781, the Armenian Church of Holy Resurrection was consecrated in the heart of Armanitola. The small Armenian community was flourishing at the time, monopolizing land purchases, properties, even owning whole villages, earning income through trade and rents respectively. Some early Armenian settlers in Dhaka arrived at a time when the country was in crisis. 1787 saw a devastating famine, coupled with unprecedented early flooding in March of that year. Armenians rallied around to help not just other Armenians, but also their friends and local people and the communities of Dhaka. Far from landing on Indian soil and stepping into the rhythm of a comfortable and economically progressive commerce, the Julfan Armenians immediately became immersed in the same poverty and diseases that were engulfing the lives of Dhaka locals at the time. Basic food such as grain and fresh water were in very short supply, and to add to an already desperate situation, a large fire broke out and over 7,000 huts were destroyed. These weren't just homes, but also storage huts containing vital food supplies. Many hundreds of lives were lost in the fire. The famine went on to claim thousands more. People left Dhaka for other districts. There was very little for local people to stay for, whilst others from the countryside flocked to the city for help in the hope their famished families would get food. Wealthier inhabitants did indeed help those in dire straits. Their stockpiles of precious grains were now the staple supplies, and at the height of the disaster, between 9,000 and 10,000 people a day were fed through public contribution. A small number of Armenians made up this group, and although the situation quickly escalated from bad to near hopeless, they did what they could to help each other and all the people around them. One of those who survived the famine and who was sufficiently well placed to help Muslims and Christians alike was salt and property merchant Khoja Michael Sarkis. He had been born in Julfa around 1732, and during his time in Dhaka was one of the most prominent and successful of his land-owning contemporaries. It was Michael Sarkis that other migrating Julfan Armenians turned to when they wished to settle in Dhaka. The Pogus School in Dhaka is a familiar landmark in the city. What is perhaps unfamiliar to the Armenian diaspora around the world is that it was opened in 1848 by local Armenian Joachim Gregory Nicholas Pogus. His Armenian family network extended into Calcutta as well as Dhaka. His parents were Gregory Nicholas Pogus and Elizabeth Nee Sarkis. Through his mother's family line, one can see a deep-rooted philanthropic trace. His great-grandfather, Sarkis Tur Johannes, was co-founder of Johannes Sarkis & Co., and during Tur Johannes's lifetime, contributed enormously to the poor and destitute and needy. His grave inscription reflects, he was charitable to the homeless and distributed money bountifully. Joachim Pogus of Dhaka married a second cousin, Mariam Nee Avdol of Calcutta. The influence of personal advancement through education was something she was already very familiar with. The significance of her well-regarded father, Johannes Avdol, the headmaster of the Armenian College and Philanthropic Academy from 1825 for 45 years, would have only made Joachim even more determined to create a school in Dhaka. What better mentor than his own father-in-law, a leading educationalist of his time? Imagine, if you will, the conversations these two would have had, no doubt discussions on education and the complexities of setting up a school, and how Joachim could learn from the first 25 years of the Armenian College's existence. Poignantly, in Johannes Avdol's will, he left a small legacy to my esteemed son-in-law, Joachim G.N. Pogus. Avdol was the perfect motivator for forward-thinking Joachim. Emulating his father-in-law, Joachim became the headmaster of his own establishment. Knowing his extended Armenian family were already making a significant difference through education in one part of India, he realized it was within his gift to create a similar institution in Dhaka. This was simply inspiring to him. I believe there will be an online lecture next month focusing on Armenians in Calcutta, so I won't elaborate on this any further right now, just to say that the Pogus School is very much going strong in Dhaka. Although no Armenians are educated there, it plays an important part in the education of local Dhaka children. And talking of schools, perhaps something our Australian friends may not know is that Sophie Galston, wife of Arshak, founder of your beautiful Galston College in Sydney, was friends with our late caretaker, Mr. Michael Martin. Here we can see a group photograph of Armenians, probably taken in Calcutta sometime before 1957, which is when Sophie married Arshak Galston. Far right is Mrs. Sophie Adanyadz, nee Mansour, later to become Mrs. Arshak Galston. And behind her is Michael Martin. The remaining people are thought to be related to Sophie, perhaps some of her Mansour family. And if anyone can identify them, please do get in touch. This image is courtesy of Michael Martin's family archive for the Bangladesh Armenian Heritage Project. Further contributions have been made by Sophie's niece, Marjorie Bedrosian Nee Gregory, whose family photographs of the Armenian community in Dhaka at Christmas 1952 is one of our most treasured donations. There is no doubt that the Dhaka jute industry kept the Armenian community in the city right up to the 1930s, but it was an area that declined in popularity in the early 20th century. Additional challenging circumstances arose: the Indian partition in 1947, the Bangladesh Liberation War from Pakistan in 1971, both contributed to Armenians migrating away from the city. And now I hand over to Julie for our current plans.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to take on the latter half of the talk about our church, which is in more modern times. We start about when Mr. Martin went to Dhaka and then so on. But before doing so, I'd like to thank Liz Chater for that extremely informative lecture and stress that without her unwavering support, this ongoing project would not exist. Her passion, her expertise, and her efforts have been the driving force that have enlightened so many of us to study about the history of the Armenian communities in this region. It's truly fascinating, and it's people like her that create a platform that teaches us about our past, which in return allows us to keep our heritage alive today and every day after that. So I want to share with you the story about this extraordinary person. The Armenian community at the time, around 1985, in Kolkata, they were receiving alarming news about the condition of the church in Dhaka. There were rumors that private groups were trying to illegally gain ownership of the church compound. In other words, they were trying to steal the church, which until today, land poaching is very common. They reached out to a man by the name of Mr. Martin, Martirosyan being his last name, who was living in Khulna at the time. They asked him to please take action and see what the situation was. So he went to Dhaka and found that the rumors were true. The church was found in a state of calamity. As you can see in these pictures, it was dilapidated and in complete ruins. He thought the only solution to preserve the church as an Armenian church was to move there with his family. So he did just that. Despite the hostility against him from different parties, still trying to poach the church and endanger him and his family, he remained headstrong, and he truly is the sole reason that this church exists today as an Armenian church. Here you can see Mr. Martin. On the left, he's with the late Archbishop Basmajian from Australia. On the right, you'll see him with his wife and daughters in front of the parsonage. And he made this church and the compound and the parsonage his home. He took that role onto himself, and he was successful, because here we are today talking about this wonderful church of ours. My father first went to Dhaka in 2010, and that's when he first met Mr. Martin. He would always hear about there being a church in Dhaka, but he thought they were confusing it with a church in Kolkata or in India. So whenever, business drove him to Dhaka, he made it a goal of his to go and find out if it was in fact a church in Dhaka. And there was, in the heart of Armanitola. And he always describes walking into the church for the first time like an oasis in the midst of chaos. From then on, Armin would travel to Dhaka about 5 times a year, mostly due to work, but also just to go to the church. He would visit Mr. Martin every time. They'd spend the day together at the church, talking and learning more about the history and how everything came about. And he really, church, the work now became as an excuse to go to Dhaka, and then church kind of became a priority sometimes. By the time that my father met Mr. Martin, his wife Veronica had passed away, and she's actually buried at the church compound, and his 3 daughters had moved off to Canada by then. So Mr. Martin was living there alone, and he was the only, and to our knowledge, even until today, was the last Armenian living in Bangladesh. And I think it's important to stress this because Armanitola, where the church is in the heart of what is now considered to be Old Dhaka. it's really difficult to explain the type of environment that this church is in. I think Father Najarian's been there with me, so he can probably fill you in. But it's overcrowded, it's highly impoverished, and the demographic is living in a very archaic mindset. And that's as politically correct as I can describe it to you all, but you're all welcome to come and see it for yourself one day. The fact that we stress this is because Mr. Martin chose to move there with his family. He chose to take on the responsibility to live with no allies, no one by his side, just him and protecting the church. And I think it's, I think we can all agree that's quite extraordinary. And we don't know many people that would take on that role. He really was one of a kind, a man of principle and gallantry. In 2013, the Catholicos of all Armenians, Catchik II, bestowed Mr. Martin with a pontifical bull in recognition of his devotion to the church. A group of Armenians, the Archbishop of Australia and Armen, flew to Dhaka for this special occasion. These are the group of Armenians that are still very active in the region and preserving our heritage throughout Asia. A key person to mention is the late Mr. Haik Titizian, who has been a fundamental role model and gave incredible support to this cause. His son, Hagop Titizian, who's also present in the slide, follows his footsteps. He was also present along with a few other Armenians. I think it's important to speak about this because everything that we do, whether it's people before us or whoever will come after us, is going to be to preserve our history. While Mr. Martin was caretaker, a recurrent concern that he always had was the future of the church. By 2014, the decline of his health had become very apparent. He had had a stroke in late February, and his daughters flew him out to Canada to stay with them. And he remained in Canada until he peacefully passed away in 2020. Armenians are very notorious for having left a mark in many parts of the world. And it's important to recognize and preserve the Armenian history, not only in Armenia, but beyond Armenia's borders as well. With so much Armenian history in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in Dhaka, which is our focus today, preservation is key, but the future is just as important. Mr. Martin was a very intelligent and forward-thinking person, and he knew that a time would come where he would no longer be able to take care of the church. So when he, realized that his health was in a steady decline, he asked Armen, as well as the group of Armenians who were involved in Asia, to take on, which brings us to present day. As we know, religion is deeply rooted in our culture for Armenians. And we just learned that while there were very few Armenians living in Dhaka, they still thought to build a church. And it is a huge church. So it wasn't just a small, church or something like that. It's far larger than a lot of the churches that we've probably all been to. We've seen many generations come and go through Dhaka, but the church has always been the symbol of our religion. I first went to Dhaka in 2010, and I relate to what my father says many times. He's a very proud Armenian, as am I, but, as far as religion goes, I don't know if we're very religious, but we definitely do respect the religion. And the president of this church is just that. When you walk through the gates in Armanitola into the church, it's very impactful and it's very emotive. And I think it's very special to be a part of something so significant and be able to speak about it today to all of you. When my father was bestowed with the honor to take over the wardenship of the church, of the million thoughts and concerns running through his mind, the key one was the biggest challenge on how to keep the church relevant. There are no Armenians remaining in Dhaka that we know of, so they won't utilize it as for worship, and it's in a predominantly Muslim area. So what were the next steps? The first of a long and growing list of action items was to create a board of members who will actively look out for the best interests of the church. Under the blessings of Basmajian, this board was created and made up of good-hearted Armenians from the UK, Asia, Canada, and the United States. Today, there's a permanent staff of 8 people performing administrative functions, maintenance, and security at the church compound. An open door policy was also implemented to attract the attention of the local media, academics, universities, etc., to the church, as well as tourists. It's important to remember that while this is an Armenian church, it is also a part of the Bangladeshi history and recognized as part of their cultural and archaeological heritage. We have an ongoing restoration process plan, and one of which is always under review, whether it's a core restoration like electricity or painting to the preservation of the art that hangs in the beloved church. The Holy See has sent 2 Armenian restorers to Dhaka to restore 2 pieces that currently hang on the altar, the Last Supper and the Crucifixion. Here you can see the before and after process. And here you'll see them hanging on the church, as well as a picture from the altar onto the viewing part of the church. Since the church has a tremendous archaeological significance, we work closely with the Department of Archaeology and Ministry of Culture and Heritage Matters. The church is a must-visit site and receives daily and foreign visitors. It can range anywhere from 5 visitors, sometimes to 100. And it's important because we also want to make sure that the church remains a functioning church and not just a tourist attraction. We're currently in the process of working to have a resident priest living on the church premises to preserve the religious characteristics of the church. One of our most notable action items is the Mr. Michael Martin Food Assistant Program, a weekly food assistant program which feeds over 500 people, adults and children. Of course, we named this program in honor of Mr. Martin, acknowledging his tireless work for the church. This is a very special program because this is more than a community outreach program where we provide the neighboring public with meals. And for many, it may be their only meal, but more so, it's a way to integrate the church as part of the community. And that's also very key in the preservation of the church. In association with other charitable organizations, we have also resumed a free medical clinic, providing the local people with basic medical care and checkups. The goal is to be able to provide this service on a weekly basis at the church as well. Mass has always been conducted at church, whether it's at Easter or we've had Armenian Mass as well. And the goal is to be able to do this at least 2 to 3 times a year. Again, we want to preserve the church as a functioning church place of worship as well. The most recent project, and one that I'm particularly passionate about and actively working on, is the importance of education amongst the youth, particularly the underprivileged kids. We've seen the number of kids coming to the weekly food program grow over the years, and recently we've rolled out a few arts and crafts projects during the food program, and the kids really engage and they've shown a great deal of talent. The goal is to be able to partner with local organizations as well as NGOs to see how we can push the importance of education from a young age and ensure that these kids are using all the resources possible to their advantage. I believe this briefly sums up where we stand today with this ongoing project. It's a diligent initiative carried out by a team of Armenian and non-Armenians who are passionate about either all or certain aspects of this mission. We're just the latest in a long line of caretakers over the years, and in the next phase of work for our wonderful church, we will endeavor to build on the structure, discipline, and organization that we have striven to create and enhance. As a building of curiosity to many local Bangladeshi outside our surrounding walls, we will continue to work hard to bring awareness and continuity to the local community through regular communication and interaction. Our team of support staff and contributors pledge to continue to develop our heritage project with a view to keeping the history of Armenians in Bangladesh alive. Ultimately, the goal is to preserve this church for future generations and to maintain the legacy of what was once a thriving Armenian Bangladeshi community alive, along with its history. And here is our church.
Thank you, Julie. That's really great. I'll be now moving on to speak about Sir Catchik Paul Chater. Some of you will already know a little bit about him, but hopefully I'll give you at least some snippets of information that perhaps you don't know. Sir Catchik Paul Chater, the greatest Armenian Hong Kong has ever seen, and here's why. To quote the South China Morning Post, whose obituary on the 28th of May 1926, 2 days after he died, said, "A biography of Sir Paul Chater would be a history of Hong Kong." Just think about that for a moment. That is quite a statement. Few people have done so much for the commercial and domestic advancement of Hong Kong in the late 19th and earliest 20th centuries than Sir Paul Chater. After his death, in reality, his commercial achievements were put to one side, and as the decades rolled by, his memory began to fade into obscurity. It can be said that he actually became a sleeper industrialist. That is, until the world went digital. I will not give you a history of Hong Kong, but I will give you an insight into someone who arrived in Hong Kong in 1864 on his first journey out of India, and became a man of vision, the likes of which Hong Kong has never seen. Paul Chater was a barefoot orphan boy from the streets of Calcutta in the 1850s, whose early life was dogged by personal tragedy and loss, with a number of immediate family members dying in sudden and unexpected circumstances. Those of you who have read up on him will know that he lost his father in a drowning accident on the Hooghly River in 1853. Chater Sr. had entered the river to try and save someone in difficulty. The tide and the current overwhelmed him, and there was nothing onlookers could do to help him. His body was recovered 2 days later. The person that he was trying to save also drowned. He was only 46 years of age, and young Catchik Paul Chater was just 6.5 years old. Almost a year after that tragedy, there was further family loss in January 1854. The firstborn son of Chater and Mariam Chater, whom they had called Paul Chater, died at the age of 22. Mariam found herself dealing with the loss of her husband and her eldest son within a year of each other. It's perhaps little wonder that Catchik Paul Chater ensured that he was always and forever known as Paul, perhaps as a lifetime nod of acknowledgement to his lost elder brother. A little over 2 years after the untimely death of his father, and just 7 weeks before his 9th birthday, Catchik's mother Mariam passed away on the 24th of July 1855, having made her last will and testament. She had signed it only the day before. One can only surmise that she knew her end was close. She was only 44 years of age. In her will, she made no mention of her children by name, but appointed the administrator of Bengal to be the executor and trustee of her estate. The children were now orphaned. Further loss of life was to strike at Catchik Paul Chater 3 months before his 11th birthday. In June 1857, his beloved sister, Sarah Amelia, who, like the whole of the family, had been baptized at the Armenian church in Calcutta, passed away at the tender age of 24. Another brother was to lose his life at the age of 21. Theo Chater, a second officer on a native trading vessel, drowned when the ship's cutter capsized while crossing the Mangalore Bar in April 1861. Not yet 15 years of age, Catchik Paul Chater had lost 5 members of his immediate family, a difficult thing for anyone to deal with, let alone a child. Is it any wonder, then, that the siblings Paul remained close to during his lifetime were the 2 younger ones? Sophie was 7 and Joseph only 4 at the time of their mother's death, but it would be Paul's many nephews and nieces that would provide the family constant in his life. Stability was brought to Paul's life through the steadying features of education. He was admitted to La Martiniere Boys' School around 1855, where he excelled academically and recreationally. He was both a prefect and captain of the cricket 11. In his final examination at La Martiniere, he passed the special examination for the Indian Survey Department, but he never entered the survey division in Calcutta. And turning away from what was a clear and certain path which would have kept him in the country of his birth, the teenager was instead persuaded by his sister Hosanna, who was also based in Calcutta, to go and live in Hong Kong with their elder sister Anna, who had married into a respected Armenian family in Madras, the Jordans. He landed in Hong Kong on the evening of the 1st of April 1864, The early years in Hong Kong were frugal, exciting, and occasionally lonely, but opportunities came his way and he seized everything. Other members of his family from the Armenian community of Calcutta were, by now, established in Hong Kong. Paul's eldest brother, Makar, was already in partnership with Anna's husband, Jordan Paul Jordan, as brokers and doing very well. Paul needed commercial experience, and so, rather than take the easy way of going into business with his brother and brother-in-law, he got himself a job in a bank. Within a year of arriving in Hong Kong in 1865, he was headhunted by Victor Cresaw, the manager, and John Grigor, the accountant of the newly formed Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. He turned them down, preferring to remain in the Bank of Hindustan, where he was a clerk until April 1866. In short, he had bigger fish to fry. How different his life would have been had he accepted this invitation. He had already had two potential life-changing and life-direction, career-changing opportunities presented to him, both of which he had declined, and he was barely 19 years of age. He continued as a clerk with the Bank of Hindustan. He observed and learnt enough to branch out on his own as a broker, all within 2 years of his arrival. Although he didn't go and work for the HSBC Bank, he astutely was one of the very first Hong Kong local residents to successfully subscribe to the shares allotted at the bank's inception in 1865. He had no clue as to how important that decision would be, not just for him personally, but for the many hundreds of people those shares and his legacy has helped over the last 100 years. He kept those shares until his death in 1926. They were extremely lucrative to his financial portfolio. From its very early inception in 1865 and onwards, he enjoyed the profits and dividends of those shares and was able to reinvest his gains into other projects that would benefit the colony. For him, he wasn't necessarily hungry for personal success. It was more that he was hungry for community progress. One such project that I'm sure you are all aware of is the Prior Reclamation Scheme. In 1887, he put together a detailed proposal to reclaim 57 acres from the sea, something that would make Hong Kong the biggest, most advanced business centre and the financial hub of Asia in the 21st century. Of course, he couldn't possibly be thinking that far ahead, but he was indeed thinking of Hong Kong's future growth. It was not without its difficulties. He had to convince the British government of the feasibility of such a project. To do that, he had realised that handwritten letters delivered months after they were written and sent back to England by sailing ship wasn't the most ideal way of communicating. I think email at this point would have been quite useful, but instead he decided to go directly to see the government ministers in London personally. He sailed immediately, carrying his proposal and detailed plans with him. Today, Hong Kong stands on land that was built by Paul Chater. The foundation stone was laid in 1890 by Queen Victoria's son and close friend of Paul Chater, His Royal Highness the Duke of Connaught. It was completed in 1904 and measures 75 metres deep by just over 3 kilometres long, the entire waterfront of central and western Hong Kong. The reclamation scheme created 3 new roads. De Roe Road along the old Prior, Connaught Road was on the new Prior and it was named after the Duke of Connaught, and Chater Road was in the centre of these two, named after Sir Paul. This project led Paul Chater to realise that he needed associated resources to make his vision work. He put his commercial energy into the development and fundamental building blocks and materials, enterprises like the Hong Kong Brick and Cement Company, of which he was chairman. He involved himself in the developing utility of electricity And of course, he is commonly known for creating a company to manage land and property development in Hong Kong. In early 1889, he jointly created with James Johnston Keswick of Jardines, the Hong Kong Land Investment and Agency Company Limited, later to be known as Hong Kong Land. Chater remained joint head of the company until his death in 1926. And the bankers? Of course, they were Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. The core of Hong Kong Land's enviable portfolio of prime properties still stands on land today created by Paul Chater, as well as starting what is considered the biggest land development company in Asia today. He was also one of the original promoters and subscribers of Hong Kong Electric, the colony's first generator of electricity. Within a year, he was part of a business that introduced 50 streetlights into the main central area of Hong Kong, and he put the first electric elevator into one of his own buildings, Hong Kong Land's Queen's Buildings. To run electricity, he needed coal, and during the course of 1889, he not only started a successful property business, he went on a deep exploratory expedition into Tonkin, which is present-day Vietnam, seeking coal. Once he and his advisory team found potential areas, he opened up coal mines for the French government in Tonkin. He struck a deal to bring coal into Hong Kong for use by the newly formed electric company that was supplying power to the new buildings, some of which were erected by Hong Kong Land on the newly reclaimed area created by him. 3 major developments in the space of a couple of years. Because of his work for and with the French in Tonkin, he was awarded the Légion d'honneur by them for his contribution to French economy. And whilst he was considering the future of Hong Kong, he was also at the forefront of developing across the harbour on what was then considered barren land, predominantly garden lots. A step too far, some thought. Many scoffed at his outlandish idea, but his resolve was never shaken. He believed that Kowloon had a key role to play in the future of Hong Kong. At the time he drew the plans up for the prior reclamation in 1887, he had also just created the Hong Kong and Go Down Wharf Company on Kowloon, and was instigating reclamation on that side of the water, as well as a view to building wharves and go-downs with a deep enough draft in the harbour to take larger ships. Not content with building on both sides of the harbour, he was also building a home. Chater's bungalow became a landmark property, and when completed was declared one of the most attractive residences in Kowloon. I found a rare description of it in a book by a traveller written in 1889. It said, "He, Chater, took us first to see his docks and his go-downs, resounding with the loud clangers of trade, and then through the grass shadowed with banana trees to this lordly pavilion set on the crest of many flowering terraces, its pale yellow outlines cut cameo-like against the burning blue of the equatorial sky. On the right is the naked side of a hill, all deeply tinted buff, warmed with red, and everywhere else a sea of satin-leaved tropical foliage. The centre of the pavilion is a great banqueting hall with domed roof 30 feet above the tessellated pavement. The walls are frescoed in some deep cream colour of the exterior, touched here and there with blue and rose and gold. 20 lofty arched doors give on to the veranda, from whence beyond the roses of the terrace one sees the glitter of the green waters of the harbour. At each end of the banqueting hall opens a drawing room set with mirrors and lined with divans. Beneath are tiled bathrooms needed in this hot climate after using the tennis courts and the bowling alleys. Here his guests come, come by their 20s and 50s and feast splendidly on high days and holidays, on hot starlit tropical nights. It is like the sumptuous fancy of some splendid Roman noble, proconsul of an eastern province. The pavilion for the moment is in the hands of workmen, so we may not dine there, but we do dine with him, Chater, at his townhouse, eating through many courses, drinking many costly wines, and served by many tall celestials in rustling blue gowns. This is such a beautiful and unique description of his house in Kowloon. There are a number of commercial ventures and stories in Paul Chater's life, but one that caught my attention a few years ago was this one. In December 1887, a ship called the Ardgay ran aground on a beach in Annam, Vietnam, in the middle of the night, en route between Hong Kong and Singapore. The Lloyd's agent handling the Ardgay sold her in March 1888. Sir Paul bought her for $30,500 and then approached the Hong Kong Whampoa Dock Company and asked if they would take the job of refloating her and getting classed as A1 at Lloyd's. They thought it would be a risky task and suggested it would cost him $60,000. He declined, and they came back with $55,000. That was still too much. Paul Chater offered $50,000. They declined, at which point he lost his patience and said, "I'll do it myself." He then hired a couple of engineers, bought the necessary refloating tools and equipment, hundreds of sandbags, chartered a ship and sailed to the stricken Ardgay. In June 1888, the engineers constructed a cofferdam around her and started excavating the accumulated sand. Their work was short-lived as a fierce typhoon hit the project and the ship was forced even further back onto the beach than it had been when it originally went aground. It was decided to leave it there until April the next year and try again. The engineers, led by the experienced skills of Andrew Johnston from Hong Kong, duly started again in 1889, and by October 1889, she was afloat. She sailed under her own steam back to Hong Kong. Sir Paul put her into dry dock for an overhaul and reclassing, ready for sea voyages. He then sold her for $150,000 to John Bell Irving of Jardine Matheson, with whom Chater was a long-time business partner in other interests in Hong Kong. Having weathered 2 years of great uncertainty about the vessel and having taken a big gamble many would have shied away from, it was his focus and determination, along with hiring the right experts, that got it refloated, giving Chater a cool $50,000 profit on the process. His pastimes were cricket, horse racing, horticulture, and the arts. In his early years, he was captain of the Hong Kong First 11 team, cricket team, winning his place in their ranks with consistent good play. With regard to horse racing, extraordinarily, he never missed a single horse race meeting in 60 years, attending consecutive years between 1866 and 1926. And I know this to be a fact because I've looked into and reviewed 60 years worth of newspapers and checked every single one of them for the racing results to make sure that he really was present. He raced in his own name as Mr. Paul between 1874 and 1884, at which time he sold his ponies to his business partner, but it was probably a loose arrangement fashioned between them. Modi continued to race the stable very successfully, whilst Chater focused on being a steward, judge, and chairman. Chater took up the reins again in 1912 after the death of Modi, using the racing name of Sir Paul. In 1884, he had an exceptionally successful year, winning 15 races with 10 ponies out of a stable of 30. During his racing career, he won the Hong Kong Derby 8 times as a sole owner and jointly 11 times with his business partner, Hormuzji Modi. For me, the most poignant and sweetest Derby win has to be the one in February 1926, when his pony Glorious Delilah won the blue ribbon race for him with great excitement, and yet less than 3 months later he had passed away. It was if it was his swan song. He was chairman of the Hong Kong Jockey Club for 34 consecutive years and still holds the honour as the longest standing chairman in their history. Wherever he lived, be it his sprawling bungalow in Kowloon, his townhouse in Cane Road, or his hillside mansion, Marble Hall, with its commanding views over the island and the harbour, he was passionate about gardening. Each home had a market garden section for supplying staple fruit and vegetables for the home and entertaining. But he also had flower beds, greenhouses, and nursery beds where he would grow his prized chrysanthemums. His name was a regular feature in the results column of the annual horticultural show, perhaps something you wouldn't really expect. There were occasions where, to ensure that the events took place, he would offer his own garden and grounds for them, and the crowds came in their hundreds to enjoy a day out in his vast grounds. Indirectly, Sir Paul played a part in creating the now famous Wyndham Street Flower Market in Hong Kong. As a keen horticulturist, he would buy seeds and plants from America and around the world and distributed them amongst the Chinese market gardeners. Hong Kong's flourishing flower and market garden industry is based on his early contributions. He was an avid collector of Chinese porcelain and Japanese bisenware. He amassed a great art collection, buoyed by his purchase of the Wyndham O'Law collection. Chater then set about adding to it and enhancing it. His collection was considered the best curated art pieces and paintings in the Far East. In particular, his Ming Dynasty pieces was a superb one and probably the finest in this particular period in the world. He was a great connoisseur of Chinese porcelain, and it is said his opinion as a recognized authority was sought after by the leading museums in Europe. In 1914, just the Chinese porcelain alone, forming part of the Chater collection, was valued separately in Hong Kong at 2.5 million Hong Kong dollars. At today's standard of living, that equates to 22.3 million pounds sterling. It is an overlooked fact that Paul Chater was instrumental in Hong Kong's acquisition of the new territories. He wrote at length to the British government in early 1894, bringing to the government's attention to how vulnerable Hong Kong was, with no buffers on the borders from invading foreign armies. It was his first alert to the government that galvanized them to get officials to negotiate, and in 1898, Great Britain and China signed a 100-year agreement to allow it to become a British territory. 100 years later, some of you may remember the handing back of Hong Kong and its territories in 1997, something Paul Chater had a hand in. But what of his many business interests? He was associated with all these companies as a founding member or director or a shareholder. Hong Kong Fire Insurance Company, the Canton Insurance Company, Hong Kong Tramways, the Star Ferry, Hong Kong and Kowloon Wharf and Go Down Company, Hong Kong Telephones, the Rope Company, Hong Kong Whampoa Dock Company. He was a trustee of the Matilda Hospital, Hong Kong and Shanghai Hotels, and the China Association. He was chairman of the Indo-China Steam Navigation Company, and as a director of the Hong Kong Dairy Farm Company, he was instrumental in helping to create cleaner, better farming procedures for the benefit of the community, offering better and safer dairy products to the people on the island. the Hong Kong Electric Company, which gave Hong Kong electricity long before it was installed anywhere else in the East, and the Light and Power Company, which first supplied electricity to Canton and Kowloon. And of course, there was Hong Kong Land Investment Company. Some of his charitable contributions were to Hong Kong University, donating $250,000. At today's standard of living, that equals about £1.3 million sterling, and it became known as the Chater Endowment Fund. He further contributed to Hong Kong University by completing a library project started by his equally well-known nephew, Dr. Gregory Jordan, another Armenian, who had been the chief medical officer for Hong Kong. Jordan died unexpectedly before completion. Chater funded the university's Jordan Memorial Hospital at Jordan Memorial Library, and ensured it had the books any first-class university requires. In 1912, there was a Chater Masonic scholarship started. Having persuaded Hong Kong government to donate the land for free, Sir Paul Chater paid for St Andrew's Church in Kowloon. In addition to, he also built the church hall that stands beside it and the vicarage adjacent to it. All costs were his own personal expense. In 1921, he endowed the church with £25,000, which is approximately £1.3 million sterling by today's standards. Incidentally, the marble used for the church altar is exactly the same marble that was used on the interior of his home, Marble Hall. Sir Paul had it all shipped over from Athens, as both his house and the church were being built at the same time. Marble Hall may not exist today, but if you're lucky enough to be in Hong Kong, take a look at the beautiful altar in St Andrews, with its exquisite smooth finish and exceptional veining. He also gifted the large stained glass window in the church behind the altar and the 5 chancel lights. He later furnished the vicarage and the church hall. He gave over $10,000 Hong Kong dollars, equivalent today of around £37,000, to the Union Church in Hong Kong, which enabled them to build another in Kowloon as a sister church to their one on the island. He never attended the Union Church. He made several life-changing and life-saving contributions to La Martiniere School of Calcutta of over 700,000 Hong Kong dollars. The equivalent today would be £2.6 million sterling. Sir Paul donated to the London Lord Mayor's Armenian Relief Fund as listed in his will of 1926, giving a payout of £1,000 with an additional amount of nearly 10,000 rupees, a total equivalent today would be around £80,000 sterling. Sir Paul's will was valued at over 5 million Hong Kong dollars. At today's standards of living, it would equate to around 27 million sterling. Apart from just a couple of family bequests in his will to Lady Chater, his wife, his sister Sophie, who unfortunately predeceased him by only a couple of months, his grandniece Annie Macpherson, Helen Jordan, the widow of his nephew Paul Jordan, his grandnephew Percy Manook, his nephews Chater Paul Chater, John Theophilus Bagram, and Jack Chater, respectively, he bequeathed Marble Hall to the government of Hong Kong and left the remainder of his entire estate to the Armenian Church in Calcutta in perpetuity. This included those Hong Kong and Shanghai bank shares that he purchased back in 1865. He had 297 shares at the time of his death, and they made up the largest financial portion of all the shareholdings he possessed. That figure has steadily risen over the years through various subdivisions of shares and several bonus share allocations over the decades. It is a very fortunate and healthy position to be in. Sir Paul was a man of great personal understatement, preferring to let his work continually shine and help others. Praise and appreciation were not comfortable bedfellows for him. Make no mistake, none of his success was easy. He suffered many setbacks. There were technical issues, there were staff problems, and then there were some people who simply didn't believe in him. Inevitably, though, there were those who were happy to sail in his successful slipstream. Today, we are blessed with technology at our fingertips, making our lives so much easier. So Paul was part of an era creating industries that our modern technologies rely upon today. He wasn't born special, he became special. He made inroads in industries where others feared to tread. He was ridiculed and mocked for his ideas of building wharves and godowns that could withstand typhoons. Others tried and failed. The general consensus was that it simply couldn't be done. Yet in 1886, he did just that. A man born before his time, innovative, empathetic, charitable, a one-off visionary. He lived solely to help and improve the lives of everyone in Hong Kong. To quote from a newspaper article from 1887, when he was about to make his first return journey to Calcutta in 23 years, and at that stage the prior reclamation scheme had not yet been implemented, it said, "Mr. Chater's name must be indissolubly associated with the history of Hong Kong. No man, living or dead, has done half as much for its improvement and general welfare as we think we are all well within our limits of truth in saying that no man has ever been more universally or more deservedly popular. Catchik Paul Chater has made for himself a good name which is far beyond all the honours that human power can bestow. No bigger-hearted philanthropist ever breathed life." In 1926, when he died, he was considered the most outstanding figure in the history of the colony. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange and Share Brokers Association and the Bill and Bullion Brokers Exchange all closed as a mark of respect. Such was his presence in the colony. No other public figure in Hong Kong has since had all three institutions close on their death announcement. He was indeed the greatest Armenian Hong Kong has ever seen. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Liz, for this fascinating presentation, yours and Julie's. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, before inviting His Eminence to say his concluding words, the floor is open for questions. There are some questions, I believe, in the chat box. Would you like Julie and Liz to read them and give the answers if they are?
I think one of the questions got answered by itself about the origin of Armanitola, deriving from the word Armenia.
Yeah.
That was very self-efficient. And I think, Liz, you'd probably best to answer about the history.
Hang on, I'm just having a quick look. So, did the Armenian emigrate, or did the descendants assimilate amongst the locals? Some came from Julfa, some came. Basically, a lot of Armenians migrated from Julfa to Calcutta to start with, and then they kind of went out to the satellite locations such as Dhaka, Rangoon, Saidabad up country, Chinsura, all the other places. So a lot of the early Armenians were kind of split between Calcutta or occasionally would come directly from Julfa. Yeah, we've done Amantola. Okay. Okay. I can't see any other questions there.
Yeah. Okay. Are there other questions? Yes, Rai. Unmute yourself.
First of all, thank you very much, Liz and Julieta, for this very informative lectures. I mean, it's very rich, and thank you very much. A couple of questions and maybe reflections. The question one is about the school in Bangladesh. Of course, we heard a lot about the church in Bangladesh, but it was very new for me about the school. Now, to what extent I can see that the church has a board and so-called the Armenian identity and so on is preserved. Maybe the heritage also is preserved. But what about the school? Is there any way that it can be preserved, or it's preserved? Maybe it's been used by the local community. I don't know. But that's one area that it will be interesting to find out. Secondly is, I think there is a deep respect to Paul Chater, not only for Hong Kong, but I'm sure you said this, Liz, but he established a fund for our Armenian school in Calcutta, Hayos Martasiragan Gemaran, and until today, the school is running because of the funds, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe the bishop can correct me if I'm wrong, but and that's something which I think we owe a lot to Chater for his vision to see that the Armenian school will continue. And until today, the school is running, and it's and a number of Armenian students are studying there from Armenia, from different parts of the world. And my third reflection is, these are our cultural heritage. I can see that we are trying to preserve them through our diaspora efforts. To what extent, I would ask this question is, the Republic of Armenia, I know that we do not have a Ministry of Culture these days, but to what extent the Republic of Armenia is associated with this cultural richnesses and heritage that we have throughout the diaspora, and especially in this part of the world. At the end of the day, these are all historical sites, right? Armenian historical sites dating as early as the 1700s. So is there any link between Hierarchy Kayastan, the Ministry of the Responsibility, and these cultural heritages that we do have? I mean, and one of them is, of course, this Bangladesh Church. Thank you so much again. And I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed your presentations. Thank you, Julieta and Liz, both of you.
Thank you.
Julie, do you want to do the school? Do you want to answer the question on the school?
You can go over the school. I was going to address the church linked to Armenia. You know, currently, again, the church isn't. It is a church, so it falls under Echmiadzin here in Armenia, and we work closely in the preservation of keeping it a place of worship. But within the Bangladeshi community, it is also, you know, we try to do outreach programs, and that's how we kind of keep it as a cultural milestone within their community as well. It wouldn't do much service as a Christian church there, but we try to do outreach and do good back to the community as Christians reaching out to the community. But it does fall under Echmiadzin, and you know, the goal is to have more mass and a priest there and have it be a functioning place of worship. And as far as the school is, I believe, you know, it's currently active, but there are no Armenian children or anything there. The name lives on for the Bangladeshi community.
It's really active, actually, and it's even got a Facebook page. So it's Armenian in name only, because there's obviously no Armenians in Bangladesh who can attend to it. But it is a very popular school, and it is it has a future under the name of Pogus, which is great. Your question about the Armenian College, about having a fund, I don't think the Armenian College has a fund created by Sir Paul Chater. I think what happened after he died was there was a trust set up for the Armenian Church in Calcutta, of which they have all control of the residue of his estate through the trustee of Bengal. And I believe that there isn't a fund as such for the Armenian College, but there is obviously a generous contribution that helps make and allows the school to continue. And and the church has contributed to many things. It's contributed to I think an emergency ward at a local hospital. It makes a lot of charitable contributions out of the trust fund in Sir Paul Chater's name.
Yeah, that's what I was aiming for. Yeah, that's the fund.
That it's the fund that the church controls rather than the school.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I'm aware.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes, Dr. Jabejian. Unmute yourself.
So thank you for both speakers, a very deep coverage of part of our history distributed in various parts in the world. What I was thinking of, the legacy of Sir Chater, was there any way of building a museum in Hong Kong and having all that legacy? Because I looked at the museums in Hong Kong, there are more than 40. And was there any possibility of that to happen? Thank you.
Actually, this is quite a sad part of his ongoing story. He left his very large house called Marble Hall. Some pictures I have just distributed online. Loads of people have got it now. It was an enormous house with fantastic grounds. He left that particular house when he died to the government of Hong Kong in 1926, with a proviso in it that his wife continues to live in it for the duration of the rest of her days. She passed away in 1935. And then the house devolved to the government of Hong Kong. And although Chater never actually said it word for word in his will, I think there was an assumption that there would be a museum made out of his house, but that was not to be, because the items inside it, which form part of the Chater collection, this immense, beautiful collection, was then broken up and distributed around to various government websites. And the house became almost like an administrative satellite office, if you like. There was talk about briefly creating a museum in the town hall, in the old town hall of Hong Kong, but nothing actually came of that. And personally, I think it's a real tragedy that they didn't really have the foresight to create a museum out of his house, because it would have been absolutely perfect. But having said that, and knowing the results of how World War II affected Hong Kong, the island, and how a lot of the artifacts and precious items on the island were looted, destroyed, stolen, and taken away to Japan, then perhaps having a museum, it would have only been a very short-lived thing, because pretty well everything that was of any value in Hong Kong during World War II was removed by the Japanese. Part of the Chater collection, a very small part, does still exist, but not the beautiful vast quantity of it that it used to be. And none of the china exists as far as we know. I'm led to believe, we think that was looted and taken away. and some paintings did survive, but and they're in the Museum of History in Hong Kong, and they are so well looked after, and very respected and well preserved. So it's a sad fact that although I think Chater wanted Marble Hall to be a museum, it wasn't, and here we are today talking about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, before unmuting the Archbishop, I have an announcement to make. I would like you to save the date of our next online lecture. That's the last Wednesday of June. It's on June 28th, 7 p.m. Sydney time. The topic is the current status of libraries in Armenia. Well, the focus will be on their current state and future developments. And this will include the National Library of Armenia, that is Askain Krataran, Fundamental Scientific Library of the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia, which in Armenian is Gidutyunleri Askain Akademiai Himnarar Kidagan Krataran. Then the Mesrop Mashtots Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, known as Madenataran, Mesrop Mashtotian Van Madenataran, Vache and Tamar Manukyan Library at the Mother See of Holy Echmiadzin, Mayrator Surp Echmiazni, Vache Tamar Manukyan Madenataran. Also, short introduction to the Armenian digital libraries and to the Western Armenian educational resources for children. The presentation will be done by Dr. Dikran Zarkarian, former director and at present scientific advisor, Fundamental Scientific Library, National Academy of Sciences of Armenia, Agatemia. Please register when you receive the flyer in your inboxes. Well, that's all, folks. Thank you once again, and have a good night in Australia, New Zealand, a good afternoon in Yerevan and Beirut and Kuwait, and a good morning in London and Argentina. Your Eminence, please.
Well, what a fascinating talk this was actually by Julie and as well as Liz. Sometimes people ask us why we have to preserve these churches where there is no Armenian left. So why we have to spend money and efforts. Our answer to that will be that it's our culture, part of our culture and history. And we thank all those who commit themselves to preservation, because it gives a meaning to those people who have lived 200-300 years ago and achieved all that in those days, which is not maybe possible today to achieve. I've been there, particularly in Bangladesh, Dhaka, and I've seen Mr. Martin, as you've seen the picture. And I must say that it was not easy to convince Mr. Martin, the sole person who had preserved the church, the properties, made sure that the church has a future financially, done it alone, all those years when he was there on his own. A marvelous work on his own. And when we approached him, every time, I'm pretty sure we remember all, those of us who were there, that every time when we spoke, he was telling us that the church has some small shops, or some money is kind of gathered from those shops and invested. And every time when we ask it, he turned the corner. But eventually he trusted us. And in that, our two people have too much of investment in that sense that we preserved. I mean, after he gone, we managed through Liz and her father. Luckily enough, we were lucky that He had a job there. He had a business in Bangladesh. And because of that, that's why there was no Armenian. And for the question if these places have any connection with the Armenian government, I could say that we are still working on it, that the somehow the ambassador in India, who is responsible for this part of the world, the Armenian ambassador to India, can be either honorary trustee or something like that, so that we can have some link with Armenia directly, and some, if needed, who knows what happens in the future, some protection. So it's marvelous to see that. I agree. When Liz was saying, I imagine my first time traveling there. Oh my God, what a feeling was it? It was from the hotel till the old church there, the old city center kind of. I mean, nobody in Western Europe can imagine such a mishmash. Every kind of transportation, narrow streets, smell, and it's just unimaginable. And suddenly when you get into the gates, as if you are in a paradise, totally cut from the rest of that part of the world. And I must say that it is surrounded by mosques, and most of the time you hear the azan, the prayer, Islamic prayer there. And I appreciate the fact that we managed to have, through Liz and her father, assistance to the local people there. Because of that, there is some positive kind of inclination towards the church, so that they don't make damages and so forth. It's a good picture. What concerns with the school, I remember at the time, I've been there twice only, and we were trying to have it last year. It didn't work, and to go with Vehapar, and still we are working on it. Let's see, maybe sometimes after the Miron Ornek, there can be a possibility to go. We tried to get the time to the school to see it. We didn't have the time framing, it didn't work. But I know that there is some connection, and from time to time, some small assistance. But from the very beginning, as it was mentioned, the church never been intended for the Armenian people, because there is no Armenian community there as such, as big as, let's say, Calcutta. So the church was intended, I think, basically for the Bangladeshi people. But it will be a good aspect to have a link, and even to have a sister's school with one of the schools in Armenia, maybe, so that there will be some link with the Armenian and the Bangladeshi school, and kind of extending the memory of that the founder is Armenian, so that might have a good impact on the local people. What concerns just to answer one of the questions, Chater, first I must say that his first name and last name are Christoniagan, in totally Catchik cross. And Chater, for some of you who don't know, because if someone doesn't know the background, wouldn't understand what Chater stands for. Chater is shorter for Zadur, and the Zadur is shorter for Asva Zadur, God-given, God bestowed kind of. So I think he's been, though I didn't know that. I knew that he was an orphan, but I didn't learn all the tragedies he's gone. But God has preserved him for a purpose. And yes, he was ahead of his time. He was a visionary person. And when I went, I saw his grave in Hong Kong. It was a very simple grave. I was surprised. This big man, almost kind of forgotten, almost forgotten, but not for us, obviously. And yes, one of the reasons, for me, all of his achievements, yes, I appreciate. But for me, his vision of seeing how to endow the Armenian church, or I would say the Armenian community, with such he's a financial, that's how probably he knew, so that goes on for perpetuity. He's not coming to my word. Havidanagan Allah. Because most of the rich people, just look around, of Armenians, after 1 or 2 generations, they've gone. And the money they have accumulated is gone, is not worth for Armenians. Even Gulbenkian, just think, the great Gulbenkian, only 2% of his money, of endowment, is coming for the Armenians. 2%, just think about it. And this man, Chater Asvazadur, today still his money, his assets of HSBC Bank, the interests are coming to the Armenian community, to the church, yes, in Calcutta. And I must say that, yes, he hasn't given any money for the school there because he hasn't, I don't know if I'm not wrong, I think for whatever reason, he was not accepted to the Armenian school at the time. So that's why he went to the Martinique school and he endowed the Martinique school. Though because of this good gesture, Martinique school now gives special privileges for all the Armenian students from the Calcutta Marta Siragan school to go and continue their studies there for the last 2 years, I think. And even they don't charge them. So, or even they charge them very little. So still, his kind of blessings, if I can say so, is still on the students, on the population of India and beyond. It's fascinating that how the Armenians from New Julfa, they went all the way to India, and from India they had their satellites cities all over India and outside. Don't forget, in those times, India was Pakistan, Bangladesh, India of today, and I don't know even if Myanmar was part of it as well. So because of that, the Armenians went all over, all the way to China, establishing wherever, and the population to start with was not that big. They were just merchant people. And if there were 40, 50, they established a church so that the church will be kind of the bounding together of all these merchant people. And it worked fascinatingly well up to the Second World War. Unfortunately, the coming of the Japanese destroyed this whole infrastructure. And then every kind of church or community was left on its own destiny. And if there were wise people, they managed to maintain, like the church in Bangladesh or the church in India, they managed because of the assets of such, like Chater. And others, unfortunately, were almost going to be lost, like the church in Singapore, for example. So it depends who had taken care of the destiny of the church. It was up to the individual because, as I said, the link between first India, mother link to central India, and then from India to North Chua was broken. That was the reason. Echmiadzin at the time did not have a control or a link with this to give direction, or it's only recently that the last 25, 30 years that Echmiadzin is involved with this, because when you look at the number of the priests and bishops who either worked or visited, they are mainly from Iran or sometimes from Jerusalem, and even sometimes from Lebanon or Middle East, from Antilias, for example. Yes, people went and visited clergy, I'm talking about. And that's how the bond was continued, at least what concerns with the Armenian Church. Well, I have again to thank you, Liz and Julie, for such a beautiful touching. You spoke with your heart, not only with your mind, but you spoke with your heart. And I was moved, even there were some tears in my eyes at the time. And thank for you, these people are again as alive as more than 100 years ago, probably, but still they are Armenians and they are part and parcel of our history and of our culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominus. Yes.
Բահվանի չէ ուսաբադացելոց Քրիստոս ասված մեր բահյա օրնյա եւ բահվանյա ժողովուրդ հայոց ընտանիավ սուրբ եւ բադվագան խաչիկոյի խաղության փրկի ազատյա հերևելի եւ արարու թշնամուին արժանավորյա կողության փարավորել սկեզն թորևն սրբոք բույտ այժմ եւ միշտ եւ ավիդյանս ավիդենից ամեն